Okay, great.
So those are the like decals or magnets that we put. Yeah, yeah. Hey everyone, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So my name is Jody Harrell. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a marketing manager here at Research Square. And I have the pleasure to introduce today's speaker, who happens to be my husband. So I'm doing the introduction today. Brittany, I'm doing the introduction. So Phillip Harrell is a product owner at Fidelity Investments, where he's worked since 2015. Phillip started his career at Blackball, where he built software for nonprofits, including the City of Hope, Mayo Clinic, and Ronald McDonald House. And although he started his career using traditional project management practices such as Waterfall, he has learned to work in an agile environment and has been doing so since 2012. Since that time, Phillip has come to appreciate the way that an agile approach can help simplify even the most complex projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter.
Hey everybody. So the title of today's talk is Be More Agile. And I'm going to start off by just saying that what you all do, I don't understand. So I try to talk to Jody, I try to understand it a little bit, but that's just not where I live. So as Jody mentioned, I've been in software for the last 12-ish years, and a good bit of it doing agile software development and product ownership. So we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, but I wanted to start off with a quick story. So this is our house. What's neat about this house is that it's about 35 years old. What's also challenging about this house is that it's about 35 years old. So it needs updates. It's not in need of full renovation, but there are little updates we want to make. We need to maintain it and clean it and all that sort of stuff. So there we go. So this was a bit of a challenge for us. We've been there for a little over 2 years now. And we started with, well, what do we want? Well, we want an updated house, a well-maintained house, and a clean house, which sounds easy enough. That's what most people want. That makes us feel relaxed and comfortable at home. So what's in our way? Well, time. We have a 2-year-old. Money, because we can't afford to just pay people to do everything. Information, because we don't know how to fix everything that needs to be fixed. Misaligned priorities, and really unrealistic expectations on both our parts of what can we actually get to do. So our early attempts at a solution, we tried scheduling things, we tried to-do lists, and when that failed, we tried arguing, and none of those solved the problem. As we scheduled things, we would try to say, this month we'll do the yard, and the next month we'll do the kitchen, and after that we'll do the laundry room. And what we found is that something always got in the way. It didn't work. So what worked? It's really simple. It was something that I brought home from work. It's an Agile concept or an Agile construct. And it's basically what people who do this sort of thing know as a Kanban board. And we're going to talk a lot in this presentation about the concepts that made that work. But what this led to is an increase in alignment between us of what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. Always getting the most important thing done first, and a lot more clarity about what we were going to do during the day. So we'll dive into why this worked later in the presentation. But really quickly, let's just go through what we want to accomplish today. So this is not an in-depth overview of any project management methodology, much less Agile. But what I want to do is get you to understand basically what is Agile and how is it different than traditional project management. And second, I really hope that you'll leave today with some basic concepts that you can use today, whether it be at work, at home, in any other area of your life, that you can take this home and use it today or next week or whenever you decide to try to apply it. So why listen to me, right? I'm not an expert, but let me tell you a little bit about who I am, and Jody already gave you a good background of what I've done in my career. So my name is Phillip. I'm her husband, her dad, and I'm a product owner at Fidelity Investments. So what does that really mean? So that's a pretty Agile specific word, and really is kind of Scrum specific. So what do I do all day? Well, on the left, you'll see that there are a number of different people or groups of people I either have to report to or hear their opinions, as well as competitors who are constantly trying to change the marketplace on us and make better solutions that can take away market share and basically pull business away from us. So on one side, we have the people who essentially want software. And on the other side, we have the people who build software. So our teams of software developers. In small organizations, really small organizations, they can just be connected directly. It works just fine to do that when you have a smaller group of people. For really big organizations with really complex initiatives, and even some small organizations, what we need to do is have something in the middle. And in the middle is project management, and that's where I live. So basically, product management in the middle is saying, how do we take all these different competing and sometimes aligned, sometimes competing perspectives and create a clear vision of what we want to accomplish so that our developers, who are the ones who make all the magic happen, get them what they need to do the work and to create great software, great solutions for people. So what else? Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I've been doing this for 12 plus years. These aren't my ideas, so I didn't come up with really any of this stuff. This is just pulling off of what's worked for me over the years from a number of different sources or a number of different kind of methodologies of working. And then the other thing, and this is why I think you should listen to me, is that everything I'm about to share is something that helps me at work and helps me at home, helps me be more effective and achieve whatever results I'm shooting for in those environments. So before we do this, I'm just going to invite you, if you have questions as we go, please stop me and ask. This is really casual. I want engagement. I want you guys to ask questions. But next up, I want you to understand what Agile is. And to understand what Agile is, we have to start with, how did it come about? So what was the challenge that was there that made Agile emerge as a way of implementing software? So when you're building professional software, there are a number of different things that we have to think about. So one is that a lot of people are involved. So you saw on a couple slides ago, there are a lot of different parties who care about what we build. And they all have an opinion, and they all have a reason why they have that opinion. They have an approach or a perspective they're coming from. There are a ton of possibilities. So if you put a team of great developers in front of keyboards, they can build almost anything you can imagine given enough time and enough money. So there are a lot of possibilities out there of what we could build to solve a customer's need. And The challenge, though, is you put a big team of software developers in front of keyboards to solve your problem. It takes them a long time sometimes. And because you have to pay them, it's really expensive. So what you want to make sure of in product ownership or product management is that we are pointing them in the right direction to solve the right problem and to do it as, to be honest, as efficiently or cheaply as we can while still making the customer really happy. So we don't want to build everything. We want to build the right thing. So the traditional waterfall project management approach. So you start out with a problem. You say, I want to build something to solve this problem or this set of problems. So you say, to solve this set of problems, I'm going to define what I want. I want this application, this set of software. So if you think about it like this, I want to listen to music. Somebody set out to build Spotify, right? So you say, I want to figure out what we're going to build. Let's define it. Let's put it in a really clear box. Next, let's make a plan to build it. Let's execute the plan and let's manage against the plan, which makes a lot of sense, right? It's pretty intuitive. It's what most of us do when we're faced with a problem. What that leads to in software world, and I don't know if you guys can read all this, but it leads to what's called the Waterfall Approach. And the Waterfall Approach is termed that because you have each segment of the project hands off to another segment. You don't start the second one until you finish the first. So the project goes through a waterfall sort of process to get to the end. A couple things to call out here. Let's say this is a 1-year project we're going to do, 1-year build. We might spend a couple of months doing requirements, maybe a month or 2 doing design. Let's call it 6 months in implementation and 2 months in verification. What that means is that a user doesn't actually see that software and know if what we're building is going to meet their needs until month 11 at verification, right? So if we knew what we were building and we knew for sure how to get there, this works great. If there's any uncertainty, it can fall apart a little bit. So let's talk about what the problem is there. How does this break down? As I mentioned before, it takes a long time to build a complete solution. And this sounds cheeky, and it really isn't meant to be. It's just people, and myself included, we think we know what we want. And when we learn more, our wants and needs change. You can think about that in your life. You might have a 2-year plan. That's probably going to be pretty good. A 6-month plan, better. A 10-year plan, you might be in a totally different place than you think you will be because you've learned more and your needs and desires change. As I mentioned before, in the waterfall approach, we don't know if we've built the right thing until we're almost done. So there's not a reverse current there going back up. It just says, we built it, now do you like it, yes or no? If no, what do we do? Well, we extend the timeline, we put more implementation in there, we redesign things, and it pushes everything out by a good ways. And this is a really vague, so if you guys are English majors, I'm really sorry. That's not my forte. Things are going to change a lot during the project. It's kind of vague. What I mean there is that everything can change. Technology changes. The people who want the software can change. The people who are managing the project can change. Everything is up for grabs in a 1 or 2 year project. So what do we do? This is an alternate approach, and this is where we're going to start talking about Agile. As we mentioned before, in traditional waterfall software development, you see the top there is what we fix in, it's what we lock in, we write in stone, and the bottom is what we estimate. We start in waterfall and say, let's define the scope really clearly, and then let's estimate how long it's going to take there, how many people we need, how much money we need and resources, and how much time it's going to take them to build it in the lower right under time. As I mentioned before, if something changes, we have to re-estimate everything. We redefine the scope, we have to re-estimate everything, and it's hard to communicate and it's hard to kind of keep on top of that change. It's not welcomed change. In an Agile approach, we flip it on its head a little bit. We say, let's define what resources we have. Let's define sets of time, chunks of time we're going to work within. So it might be 1 year or it might be 26 2-week chunks. And then from that, let's plan out what we can get done. Let's do the most important thing that we can do, and let's do it as fast as possible. So before we go deeper into that, let's talk about where Agile kind of began. So there are threads of Agile coming out from the 90s and coming from different subject areas. And I'm honestly not a historian on this. I don't know it all inside and out. But sort of the culminating point of the Agile movement was a group of software developers in Utah got together, and 12 of them came up with an Agile manifesto, or manifesto for Agile software development. And they defined a couple of things. They said, we're going to define our values as it pertains to developing software, and then we're going to define a list of 12 principles. We're not going to get into the principles here, but we're going to get into the values, the thing that drives a lot of agility in how we think about things. So we value the things on the left, and I'll let you read them, but you value the things on the left more than the things on the right. It doesn't mean that the things on the right have no value. That's not what this means. It just means we value the things on the left more. Key things here that I want to point out are response to change and collaboration and individuals and interactions. So it's about how are we communicating with each other in real time, adapting to change to make sure we're consistently making the next best decision we can make. So what is Agile? To me, and I think this is something you would get slightly different answers if you ask a bunch of different people. To me, Agile is a mindset or an approach. It's supported by different methodologies. So you saw a waterfall methodology of project management before, where we break projects up and we approach them in the same way each time. When we get into Agile, Agile to me is the mindset, and the methodologies are things like Scrum or Kanban or extreme programming. Scrum being probably the most popular, or at least the most popular that I'm aware of right now. Kanban being one that takes us back to the refrigerator, right? Back to the refrigerator board that I showed you earlier. So that brings us to the question, and this is something where laughably Jody and I had a series of emails going back and forth of how do we frame this topic? And it came back to, well, is Agile really project management? In my opinion, it's kind of a yes and no answer. You can have project management functions, and there's project management that happens in any of these methodologies. You have to do it. You have to tell people what you're building. How are we progressing? Are we going to meet our goals or not? How are we controlling costs? How are we controlling the scope of our project? However, to me, Agile itself is the mindset we take into our project. The methodology is the area where project management ties in. So I've used Agile Mindset a number of times here. What is the Agile Mindset? And again, this is not a comprehensive list. But the keys to me are embracing change, learning as you go. So you want as many chances as possible to learn something new about what your customers think, about what's valuable to them, and about if you are meeting their needs or not. Based on that learning, the best way to plan is to plan when you have more information, so we plan as we go. We provide value early and often, which we're going to cover in the next slide. And then if something's not working, we change it. So we don't get married or fixed to one way of doing things. We change it as we go if something's breaking down and not working. So this is a fun slide. I like it, and people who are like way deep in the Agile world, it makes their skin crawl a little bit. So we're going to avoid that part of it and go into the concept that we're trying to go for here, which is on the top. Somebody comes and says, I want you to build me a car. Our way of breaking this down is typically functionally. We say, great. First, we're going to need a wheel. Then we're going to need to add a chassis to it. Then we're going to add a body, and then we're going to add the engine and the steering wheel and the roof. What happens, though, is that the person's not getting any value out of that as we go. They're unhappy until step 4 when you get the actual finished project. Instead, we want to try to break things down smaller and get value to people as early as possible and frequently improve upon that so that their experience is continually getting better. So you want a mode of transportation? Great. We can get you a skateboard really quickly. Then we're going to add handlebars to it and make it a scooter. That's going to improve it a little bit, make you a little happier. Then bicycle, then motorcycle. And what you see here is 2 things. One is that somebody's getting some value out of this as we go. but also the end result is a little bit different. After riding on the motorcycle, they realized they really liked the open wind, and they said they wanted a convertible instead of the car with a roof they started out with. So it's a good example. It's simplistic, but it's kind of a fun example of how responding to change and replanning as you go can lead you to a better result. Are there any questions? We're going to get into, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
There we go. Isn't it more resource intensive? Because like on the bottom, you're sort of reinventing what you're doing at every step.
It's a really good question.
Instead of just.
So you remember when I said that it makes some people's skin crawl?
Yeah.
That's why.
Okay.
So here's the thing, and this is something that is up for debate. And one of the people I work with, who's like leading a lot of the agile transformation across the organization, he actually posted something the other day that I thought was really interesting, and it's that agile's not necessarily faster to build code. So we're not necessarily, if we know what endpoint we're at, or what endpoint we want to shoot for, agile is not the quickest straight line to it. However, if we're learning as we go, where we end up is more likely to be where we want to go than where we start. So there are a lot of different, and diving probably deeper than you care to go, but there are a lot of different technology evolutions that have made this sort of progress more feasible. So you're not scrapping and starting over. You're building in chunks, and you're building on top of those chunks and going, right? But that's way outside of my area of expertise. Does that answer your question? Cool. Here, let me give you a microphone here.
Bottom one, as you progress, showing them different modes of transportation to use what's up there, it becomes collaborative because you're showing the customer what developers are capable of doing and what that functionality actually looks like. And I can definitely see the benefit of that. Have there been a lot of experiences where as they watch it progress and the functionality change, and as the customer realizes what is really possible, because often these projects, it's impossible to really know what the functionality is going to be. As that progresses, do they drift radically from what their initial need was?
I think it's so in my experience, I haven't seen a radical departure from what you wanted. What I do see though, and I think where I think this has value in my experience, is that you might get to step 3 and they say, hey, that's actually all I need. Now that I'm using it, I don't need to pay for the rest because I've got what I need here. I think the other part of that is that where the radical shifts often happen is in miscommunication, right? So they start out saying, I want X, and it's communication. So you have to have a speaker and a listener. Somewhere in that gap, it doesn't get translated well. So by putting something in front of your user early, you identify those gaps in understanding very quickly. So one of the sort of buzzword phrase type things is fail fast, fail early. So we want to fail as quickly as possible because it's a lot better to fail now and fix it than it is to fail a year from now. Cool. Thanks for the questions. Any other questions? Okay, so what I want to do here is let's talk about what concepts from the house improvement project that Jody and I did, what concepts from that made it work, and what can you hopefully take away from this to bring more agility into your day-to-day lives. So this, as I mentioned before, is known as a Kanban board, and it's really simple. You have a column for to do, a column for in progress, and a column for done. So why does it work? First off, and I'll cover this in the next slide a little bit, but this in itself is what's known as an information radiator. So what does that mean? It means that we're making key information. So what are we working on? What's our next priority? What have we finished? we're making that information really easily available to anybody who cares to look at it. It helps us communicate progress to people very quickly. It helps us understand alignment very quickly. In that example, this was sort of a dramatic recreation here that I did last night, but in the real example, the left side was about 20 stickies long, the right side was about 10 stickies long, there was 1 or 2 things at most in the middle, and every time we finished something, we came back to the refrigerator and we reprioritized. So I can't tell you the number of times we either wrote a new sticky or we tore one up and threw it in the trash because we realized we didn't care about it anymore. Things got moved from the bottom to the top, top to the bottom. So by doing that, we eliminate misalignment. So we're constantly realigning on what we care about most. So next, I use the same graphic here because I think it illustrates really well, is time boxing. Start with saying how much time am I going to dedicate towards something, and then figure out how much you can do in that time and bind yourself based on time. So instead of, let's say you have a research project to do. So go research, and I don't know how to apply this to your lives, but go research some new technology and if your group can use it. That's an open-ended thing. If you just say, I'm going to research until I know the answer, it's wide open. You could do it for an hour, you could do it for a week, you could do it for 3 months, depending on what you need to get out of it. But what you can do to change that is to start by boxing yourself in time. I'm going to spend 2 days to learn everything I can to help me make this decision. At the end of 2 days, if I don't know the answer that I need to know or I don't have confidence, I'll allot another chunk of time. But let me start with the time, fill it as much as I can with useful, high priority work, and then reevaluate. Next is breaking work into really small chunks. And regardless of the methodology within Agile that you use, breaking work into small chunks is critical. So I like this isn't exactly related to software, but it's just the idea of breaking up smaller goals and hitting achievements as you go is a more effective way of going about solving a problem. It comes into the ability to adjust course if you need to, but it also goes into something that's just kind of psychology, is you see wins early. You get motivated by wins and you want to keep working. So whereas halfway up that big mountain, you might be defeated and tired and want to go down, if you're making wins along the way, you're going to be motivated to take the next step. Again, this is one that I can't, if you take one thing out, do this. Limit your work in progress. Multitasking doesn't work. It's context switching. You're changing focus from one thing to another. And at the end of the day, if you have 8 hours and you spend all 8 on one task, you get one thing done. If you spend all 8 on a series of 4 tasks, you might have 4 tasks, 25%, partway done. Finish one thing, get the value from it, then move to the next. What this requires, though, is there's somebody out there who's written about this, and it's an interesting read, but it's ruthless prioritization. So it's the idea that you have a limited amount of time. Typically, in most of our jobs or in our personal lives, you have an unlimited amount of options of things to do. So you always have to be putting the most important to meet your outcomes at the top. Anywhere you go, you're always making that decision, whether you're doing it consciously or whether you're doing it subconsciously. So this is sort of the catch-all for other things I like. Outcomes are important, outputs are not, and I'll kind of ... unless it's helping you reach an outcome. So if your outcome is for us to feel more relaxed in our home and feel more proud of where we live, that's what's important. All the steps to get there aren't unless it feeds back into that outcome. Another one that we see a lot is happy customers. Happy customers are what's important. We can build software all day long. We can make it really pretty, really robust, have all the features. If they're not happier at the end of the day, we wasted our time. Keep what's valuable and nothing more. That goes back to one of the Agile Mindset things I talked about earlier. But if you're doing something and it's not working, change it. If you're doing it and it's not working and it's because somebody's telling you to, or you're in a structure where it's necessary, talk to them and try to change it. But try to only keep what's valuable to move you forward. Servant leadership is another buzzword, but it works. So if you're leading a team of people, whether it's formally or informally, figure out where you need to lead them to, what direction you're trying to move them toward, and then get out of their way. Help them understand the vision, give them all the empowerment and all the support they need to do that well, whether it's personal support, whether it's structural around the office, a place to sit, whatever else. Clear the way for them to succeed and let them get there, with you kind of supporting them along the way. There's a cool Einstein quote about this that I didn't put in the deck, but it's something like, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes on the problem and understanding the problem, and 5 minutes trying to come up with a solution. Fall in love with the problem. So if you're faced with a problem, our inclination is typically to start by trying to find solutions to it. And before somebody's done telling us what's wrong, we're 15 layers into how do we solve it. Stop, ask why, ask what the impact is, what's the pain that the problem's causing, and understand it really, really well. And when you do that, any solution you come up with, you can better understand, does it actually solve the problem? And the last is simplicity. I think we live in a time, I guess, maybe it's always been the case, I don't know, it seems like it is, but everything seems more complicated than it needs to be to me. I think a lot of times that comes out of the fact that we try to put a really robust methodology on top of the work we do. We try to put really great, descriptive, all-inclusive words around a concept. And that's great to some degree, but it's better if you can take those complex ideas, boil them into something simple, and have a more understandable conversation with another person about how to solve that challenge. So, real quick summary. I've already told you this. I hope that you learned a little bit about Agile Project Management and Agile and how to bring it into the workplace, a little bit more than you knew before. I also hope that through the slides and through the concepts that you found something that resonated with you, something you find might be valuable to try. And I hope that you'll take it, try it, and if it doesn't work, chuck it. So, Q&A. This can be questions about the presentation, questions about Agile. If you have a specific challenge that you think might fit into this, we can talk about it. Like I said, I don't know your world, so you'll have to bear with me if you have to explain things, but go for it.
I have a question about how you would do this with more than one person. Like going to your fridge example, you have paint the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So what if Jody painted the kitchen and then you went to patch the holes?
Yeah.
How do you manage that when there's more than one person deciding what the priorities are?
Yeah, that's great. So when you have multiple people working in a team, that's where the information, well, a couple of things. First, there are structures in place. So you talk about Scrum and Kanban. There are structures in place that help you manage that, where you identify up front. You go into a planning session where you say for Scrum especially, you say for the next 2 weeks, a sprint, we're going to accomplish X set of goals. So we're going to fix the time, fix the resources, accomplish the goals. And then at the beginning of that, you plan for that 2 weeks. You say, well, Jody's going to do the painting and I'm going to do the patching. So we better get in alignment about that because we have a dependency between her work and my work. So that's part of it. Part of it's also just general communication. Typically we're working in a small Agile team. It's going to be anywhere from about 3 to 10 people. So it's small enough that you can talk on a regular basis and identify where you might step on each other's toes and work that out. But the goal is that the team works that out. It's not somebody from on high coming and saying, you do this and then you do that. It's the team identifying how they're going to accomplish things and working together to organize.
So who all would be, you said in a typical team it would be 3 to 10 people. So who would be involved in that? Like how many developers are there versus other roles?
So I'll answer that from the perspective of Scrum, which is what I'm most familiar with. I think it changes depending on the methodology that you use, but Scrum is a very common one that we use. In Scrum, there are 3 roles: product owner, Scrum Master, team. So typically when you look at a team, you'll have a product owner. So that's the person defining what are we trying to accomplish. A Scrum Master who's supporting the team and removing anything that's in their way of accomplishing it. And then the team, regardless of what their specialty is, they're organizing themselves to meet that goal. Does that answer your question?
Anybody else have any questions, scenarios? No, the answer is no. Okay. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
I guess this is very embedded in the work that you do. Have you
Mhm.
ever tried to sort of implement this? I mean, maybe with Jody,
Yeah.
in a scenario where people aren't in this mindset and know all the words? Like, how do you get people on board to sort of try this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It was actually one that I was thinking about a lot as I was trying to prepare for this, because it's, I think, the two biggest forefronts where you've seen this work. So I know that a lot of this is drawn off of manufacturing processes. So like your Lean and Six Sigma sort of stuff, your process engineering, a lot of it's drawn from that. It's really heavily used in software and has been long enough that it's evolved over time. So people have figured out what works and what doesn't to some degree. And then oddly enough, a lot of the examples I could find of where this is used outside of that are in the family. So there's a cool link that I have here where a guy gives like a 17-minute TED talk about how he's worked with families who have done Agile with their kids. And the example is like he went and visited first thing in the morning, 2 8-year-olds. Mom comes downstairs, pours a cup of coffee, sits down, and the kids go complete their tasks and move the items on their sticky boards, showing like, I've done this, because they like yeah. So I've not tried it yet. Ours is 2, so we don't know. Going back to the question though, the other place I've seen this work is in like our Agile Enablement Office, our marketing groups, like that sort of thing. It's starting to make its way into the business side of things a little bit more. And the key is that you don't have to use a lot of complex language. You can use it really simply. You can say, instead of like, let's make a long plan, but know that the further out it goes, the less stable it is, the more likely it is to change. Let's get together and talk. Let's see what we can accomplish in a week. Let's see what we can accomplish in 2 weeks. How are we going to do that as a team? Cool. I'm going to take this part. What do you take? And so you can have a conversation around it where you're implementing practices, but you're not actually using the words, because the words get in people's way because they either learn them, and a lot of times people learn them wrong. So they put the words on top and didn't change the practice. It's better to change the practice and then later apply the words. Any other questions?
Anybody else?
So how do you use this if you're dealing with someone like an outside vendor who's not on your team and you're trying to deal with somebody who actually has a contractual deliverable? How do you work with that?
Yep. So when we went back, I mentioned traditional project management fails in certain scenarios. That's a scenario where it wins. That's a scenario where it works. The problem is that, let me kind of go in a couple directions with the answer, because it's a really, really interesting question to me. So, and I'm a nerd about this stuff, so sorry. So when people go to buy something, right, I'm not buying, 20 hours of an iPhone assembler's time. I'm buying an iPhone. That's what I want. I don't really care how long it took you to make it. I don't really care, what process it went through, as long as it was, ethical. But I care about the end product. When you're buying software or when you're buying any service or any end result, that's a lot of times what you care about. And that's where you have to have some level of traditional project management if you want to operate with that sort of contract. What I've seen with the companies I worked with before Fidelity, so in Fidelity I'm more in a product management role where we're defining what we want to build and we're setting our roadmap and vision with input from a lot of people, but we're the ones in control of where are we going. I've worked in companies where it was sort of a hybrid, where we sold our services to an outside group or an outside company, and they wanted software that solved this problem. And how we accomplished it, they didn't care. When we did that, we set the contract of what the end solution would be and whatever boundaries around it we could get to. And then we internally approached the work iteratively. So we still had a fixed scope. And as much as we could have tried to avoid it, we had some level of fixed timeline. But when we brought the work in, we still went through this process of iteratively improving upon the work toward that end goal to try to get the best of both worlds, so we could still sell the work but internally we could bring some proof of what we're doing to the customer earlier so that they could provide feedback and we would know early if we were about to miss the mark.
So if you're an individual contributor and you just want a way to kind of organize your day or your week or your quarter or whatever, what's the best? Is it Kanban that would be the best way to kind of organize your deliverables and prioritize things if you're not really working a lot with other people?
Yeah. So I think that either approach could work, Kanban or Scrum. So Kanban, you have that list of to do and progress and done, and it's kind of seen as like a pull mechanism. So whenever the in progress column is empty, you're pulling work in based on the next highest priority. Scrum is more looking at it from a push mechanism. So you're saying, what can I do in 2 weeks? Let's push work into that. Let's set the boundaries of it, time, scope. Let's do as much of that as we can and then evaluate how we progressed. I think with an individual contributor, it's less critical that you are following a particular methodology, which these methodologies are often geared around how do we get groups of people to accomplish common goals. I think what I would focus more on is how do I bring in some of these concepts of Agile or Agile ways of thinking, like embracing change, knowing that change is coming, getting feedback early and often, working to take on the best ideas that we can use and try things out, treat it as an experiment. I would be including those sorts of things first and foremost. And then if you need a structure, there are some cool free apps out there, like Trello is a good one, where you can kind of set up your to-do list and you can just set up a Kanban board really easy if they don't have a template already and just move things over. And if that helps you track your work, all the better. That would be my thought.
Is there anything else other than Trello? Can you just call out some?
So Trello is free, I know, and is good for Kanban. If you work in a space where you have a whiteboard or you have space to do it, use sticky notes. They're really easy. It's not good for the environment, but otherwise it's really good. I could research that a little bit more. Most of the tools we use are paid tools, and I wouldn't recommend that somebody for themselves go in and use a paid tool because it's just kind of self-defeating. It's not worth the extra expenditure. But yeah, sorry, I feel like of all the questions I answered, yours the least well.
Does anybody else have any questions? That was great. Thank you, Phillip.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me.
So just a quick word. We don't have a meeting planned for December. We're not going to have one for the holidays. So happy holidays, everyone. We're going to try to convene back in January, but we'll be sending out an invite shortly. So thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
And then there's also comments.